The sun was sinking behind the red cliffs of Rattlesnake Canyon when Eli Harrow, a seasoned cowboy with dust on his boots and 30 years of trouble behind his eyes, guided his horse along the dry riverbed that once fed the entire valley. The river had been dead for 7 years, sucked dry by drought and swallowed by superstition, but Eli rode it anyway because it was the only shortcut back to town before nightfall. And he didn't want to spend another night sleeping under a sky that felt like it was watching him. The air was thick and strange that evening, quiet in a way that made even his horse snort uneasily. And when Eli pulled the reins to check the wind, he suddenly noticed something ahead, 3 shapes lying motionless in the dried mud, half covered in dust, looking like shadows that didn't belong to the earth. He slid off his saddle and approached carefully, one hand resting on the handle of his revolver, because this land had taught him again and again that anything you found in the open might be a trap or an omen. But as he came closer, he realized the shapes were women, 3 native women, covered in mud as if the ground itself had tried to swallow them, their limbs stiff, their hair tangled with cracked clay, their eyes closed. His first thought was that they were dead, but their bodies didn't look like corpses. They looked like people who had simply collapsed there minutes ago, and yet the mud on them was fully dry. Eli knelt down beside the first woman, touched her wrist, and cursed under his breath when he felt a faint pulse, weak but real. The second woman had the same pulse, the third too. Each breathing, barely. Each alive but unconscious with no sign of injury. No bruises, no broken bones. Just the uncanny stillness of people who had been pulled from another world entirely. Eli didn't know their tribe, but the beaded bracelets, the painted symbols on their arms, and the woven feather cord suggested something old. Older than the townsfolk liked to admit still existed out here. Suddenly his horse reared and whinnied violently, backing away as if something invisible had grabbed its reins. And Eli felt the ground hum beneath his boots, not shake, not rumble. Hum, the way a tuning fork vibrates after being struck. And he stood so fast his hat nearly fell off. The canyon wind died. Every insect went silent. Even the distant cry of the hawk froze in the air. And for a moment Eli felt like time had stopped breathing. He stepped back and that's when he saw it. One arm, the arm of the middle woman, slowly rising off the ground, lifting upward through the air like a puppet pulled by a string, mud cracking off her skin in thin flakes as her fingers reached toward the darkening sky, and Eli realized she wasn't waking up, she wasn't conscious. Her eyes didn't open, her chest barely moved, yet her arm kept rising in a slow, deliberate arc, pointing toward the far end of the canyon where the shadows pooled thickest. Eli should have run, logic told him to run. Any sane man would have sprinted back to his horse and galloped away, but something ancient and magnetic held him there. The same feeling he'd had once as a child, when he stared into a cave he wasn't supposed to approach. The feeling that something powerful was unfolding and he was meant to witness it. The woman's arm stopped at full extension, pointing at a cluster of boulders shaped like broken teeth, and Eli swallowed hard, because he suddenly remembered a story his father used to tell by lantern light, a legend of the sleeping, daughters of the river, guardians chosen by spirits to protect the land, said to awaken only when the valley was on the brink of disaster. Eli had always dismissed it as campfire nonsense, but now, staring at these 3 women who seemed pulled from that very legend, lying in a riverbed that shouldn't have held life for years, he felt a cold coil of truth wrap around his ribs. He turned slowly to follow where the woman's finger pointed, and that's when he saw movement. Something shifting behind the jagged boulders. Something the size of a man but moving wrong, crawling wrong, as if its limbs bent in ways they shouldn't. And Eli took a step forward before instinct yanked him backward. He aimed his revolver, heart pounding hard enough to crack his chest, and whispered a curse as the figure slid out from behind the rocks. Tall, thin, wrapped in tattered hides, face smeared with charcoal symbols, eyes glowing with a pale blue luminescence that reminded Eli of lightning trapped in a bottle. The figure didn't walk, it glided, its feet not quite touching the cracked earth, and in its hand it carried a staff carved with spirals that pulsed softly, the same hum Eli had felt in the ground now vibrating in his spine. He stepped in front of the unconscious women on instinct, raising his weapon though he knew a bullet would do nothing against whatever this was, and the figure halted 10 paces away, tilting its head with slow curiosity like a wolf examining prey. "These plains are closed, Cowboy," the figure spoke. Its voice layered, one human tone and another older. Deeper echo beneath it, "You walk where spirits have awakened." Eli didn't lower his gun. He couldn't. These women needed help, not prophecy. And he yelled back, "They're alive, they need a doctor, what happened to them?" But the figure only smiled, a hollow expression stretching too wide, and it tapped the ground once with its staff. Instantly, the wind roared back to life, swirling dust in violent spirals around Eli. The earth hummed louder. The air shimmered with waves of heat, although the sun had already vanished. Behind the cliffs, and the women's bodies began to glow faintly, their pulse strengthening under the mud, their breaths deeper as if something ancient was being poured back into them. Eli shielded his eyes, stumbling, and in the whirlwind he heard the figure speak again. "They rise with the river, and the river rises with blood. Leave them or meet the fate of those who came before." But Eli Harrow was not a man who left people to die, spirit or no spirit, and he fired a warning shot into the air, the crack echoing through the canyon like a challenge. The figure hissed, the staff pulsed violently, and a shockwave knocked Eli backward into the mud, his gun flying from his hand. As he scrambled to stand, the ground beneath the women began to fracture, thin lines of blue light glowing through the cracks as if something beneath the earth was waking up. The women's bodies trembled, their chests rising faster, their fingers twitching, their eyelids fluttering, not from consciousness, but from power, and Eli felt a force push him back again, this time gentle but firm, as if warning him to stay away. Then, as abruptly as it began, the wind died, the glowing figure dissolved into the darkness, and silence returned to the canyon, leaving Eli alone with three mysterious women who now breathed steadily, their arms at their sides once more. Eli wanted to drag them onto his horse, to get them into town before nightfall. But he knew this was no ordinary situation. The cracked earth beneath them still pulsed faintly, as if marking them or protecting them or maybe warning him away, and the sky had deepened into a strange purple hue he'd never seen before. Coyotes howled in the distance, 3 howls in perfect unison, and a chill crawled up Eli's back. He didn't know what he'd stumbled into, but he knew one thing for certain. These women were not victims of drought, bandits, or misfortune. Something ancient had placed them here. Something powerful was awakening, and the arm that had risen, pointing to the dark end of the canyon, meant that Eli Harrow was now part of it, whether he wanted to be or not. He knelt down one last time, wiped the mud from the nearest woman's forehead, and whispered, "If you can hear me, I'll get you out of this, I promise," then gathered his courage, holstered his empty gun, and prepared for the longest, most dangerous night Rattlesnake Canyon had seen in 100 years, unaware that the moment the woman's fingers twitched again, and her head shifted toward him, the true story was only just beginning, and the shadow behind the boulders, the one the glowing figure had left behind, was already crawling closer. Night clamped down on Rattlesnake Canyon like a closing fist as Eli Harrow paced the dry riverbed, torn between rescuing the three mysterious women and fleeing. Before the strange presence returned, the moon rose blood-red over the cliffs, casting long shadows across the cracked mud, and just as Eli leaned down to lift the first woman onto his horse, all three of them inhaled sharply at the same time, their eyes snapping open in unison, bright, glowing, and filled with an ancient awareness that froze Eli in place. The ground trembled again, softer than before but steady, like a heartbeat waking beneath the earth, and the women slowly sat upright, mud flaking from their bodies as if it feared them, their gazes locking onto Eli with a mixture of recognition and warning. Before he could speak, the middle woman, the one whose arm had risen, lifted her hand again, not pointing this time but signaling him to stay perfectly still as a dark, crawling figure appeared at the canyon ridge above, its limbs contorting, its glowing blue eyes fixed on them like a hunter stalking prey. The women rose to their feet with unnatural grace, forming a silent protective circle around Eli, and all three hummed a low, vibrating chant that made the air ripple, a sound far older than the land itself. The creature at the ridge recoiled violently as if burned, screeched a hollow, bone-shaking cry, and vanished into the rocks. The women swayed, weak from the effort, and the middle one whispered a single sentence, hoarse, ancient and heavy with warning. "The river wakes. And now, Cowboy, so must you." Before Eli could ask what she meant, all three collapsed again into the mud, unconscious but breathing, leaving him shaken, alone, and certain of one terrifying truth. Whatever had awakened in the canyon tonight wasn't finished with him, and wasn't finished with this land.